So first of all, who am I? Laura Johnston, General Manager of Culture and Performance at Swimming Australia. I've done that for a couple of years. Before that, I've had multiple sort of HR type roles in banking in particular and legal, and prior to that I was even a lawyer. But please don't hold that against me because I did see the light and I got out, and here I am at swimming and I just love it. So, do you reckon we've got much in common? I reckon we do. So I want to ask you a question. You're at the pointy end of coaching. What drives you? Why do you do it? Passion? Yep. What else? Full potential? What about the kids too, specifically? Fun? Yep. What happens if they do enjoy their swimming? Do you notice a pattern? Perform well. So there's a bit of a motivational link there too. If people are enjoying their swimming, then they're going to swim faster? Yeah. Okay. So if I'm to summarise that, it's really about optimising the performance and enjoyment of your swimmers, yeah? That's your role. And that's kind of my role too at Swimming Australia. I'm about optimising the performance and enjoyment of people who work with us and who work with the state and territory associations and ascta as well. So that's me. Now, correct me if I'm wrong too, but every day when you're coaching, you also have what I think is an incredible privilege, and that is that you've got the safety and well-being of kids in your hands. You have parents that they entrust you to look after their kids every day. And you have the potential to have an extraordinary impact on children. Is that fair? Yeah, okay. So safeguarding children is an aspect of your roles as coaches, and it's also an aspect of mine, because for the past 12 or 18 months I have been working with the Australian Sports Commission, the Australian Childhood Foundation, which is really at the forefront of this, with the CEOs of ascta, Swimming Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Swimming Australia. And together we've really reviewed our previous member and child welfare policies and the codes of conduct, and we've looked at what we know about best practice in safeguarding children that's come to light more recently, and we've come up with a safe sport framework that is really a win-win for our sport and for ourselves as people in positions of authority in swimming, as well as also for the kids. So we're going to talk about our safe sport framework today. We are really at the forefront of sport with this, and we can be really proud of what we're doing to lead the way. So it's a good news story all around. So I'll talk about that today, and I want to share with you some of the good news stories that we get too. Last year I had a letter come across my desk that was from a swimmer to a coach, and I just want to share a bit of an extract of that with you. So I want to say thank you. The older I get, I've realised that there were some pretty big moments in my life growing up where you actually had a good lasting impact on me, and for some of it you wouldn't even know. You encouraged me. Isn't that great? I mean, that's what you want to see, right? So that we get those good news stories that I love. But unfortunately in sport, as in society, there's always the very minimal 1% or less that doesn't necessarily go that way. And this is a true story. I was sitting down at lunch having a sandwich one day, flicking through the first 10 pages of the paper. Melbourne-based paper. Gosh, Melbourne, terrible place. Just joking, I'm from there. And this is what I found. First 10 pages. Not a good story. Not a good story at all. So there's one article about an ex-Victorian commissioner who was the first person in Victoria to be charged with grooming. We had school abuse reports going up, and then we also had a soccer coach who was guilty of rape. And these stories were actually coming to the fore because of something called the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. Have you heard of that? Yep. Okay, so that couple of people, yes, no, so I'll just explain a little bit. That's really, you may have heard of the Catholic Church and other churches, schools, And swimming was the first sport to be before that commission, set up by the government, very powerful, has a lot of pull in terms of what they can order you to do. And swimming was before the Royal Commission in 2013. It's in its 4th year now, one of the longest we've ever had. And since swimming have been before, and it wasn't a good story for us at the time either in terms of sexual abuse claims. Since that time, we've had soccer, cricket, tennis, a raft of sports before the Royal Commission. And as a result of that, there are a number of recommendations made, one of which for us was to look at, okay, well, how are we best safeguarding children? How are we keeping up with things like technology changes in society? So that was one of the impetus for looking at our Safe Sport framework. I'd like to encourage 2 questions along the way too. Let's get through this last hour with some gusto and some interaction. Okay, so what I'd like to do today then is understand how we're really leading the way in Australia in safeguarding children. So we'll look at our Safe Sport framework, and I want you to just understand a little bit more about it. We'll remind ourselves of what we can do to mitigate risks for children, understanding a bit more about the child abuse landscape. It's shifted quite a bit, so you may have had sessions in the past. We'll review where we're at the minute. We'll explore a new aspect of our framework, the Code of Conduct for Children and Young People. It is an aspect that requires higher behavioural standards than ever before. So we'll delve into that, and we'll actually have some sort of practical application of that as well. And how to manage issues in the new structure. So my objective today is that you understand all about the new framework and that you are confident and enabled to act if something were to be of a concern that's raised with you. Does that sound all right? This is about mitigating risks, not only for our kids, but also for yourselves too. We need to protect ourselves and each other. So, stay tuned. Now, we'll do this in 4 parts. We'll have a look at the Safe Sport framework. We'll go into child abuse. We'll talk about how you would act, and then we'll go into the application. Believe me, it's going to be a little bit heavy at times, but there'll be some really practical content throughout the end as well. Now, before I go on though, I've been running these sessions for over a year now. First one was last year at the ASTA conference right here. And this type of content can evoke some reactions, and people can tend to relate situations to their own families or friends or situations or events that have occurred to them in their lives. So I'd encourage you that if you need some time out, please do so. And obviously if people share their own stories, opinions, views, that we'd be sensitive to that. Okay? Fabulous. All right, so I want to ask you a question now. When you think of a child abuser, what's the picture that comes into your mind? What do you think of? Yeah, I'll go over here. Hi. What do you think of? Male? Yep. What else? Yeah. When you think of the sort of classic child abuser, what's the picture that comes into your mind? Yep, so the screaming aspect. Anything else? On their own? Yep. Okay. We had a session in Adelaide, and someone in the audience said, the dirty old man with the trench coat and that sort of thing. And it's true. I remember, I'm giving away a little bit in terms of my age, but when I was growing up, we were told about stranger danger. Remember that? Yeah, and it was all about the person that you didn't know, the male, probably screaming, potentially, other actions as well that we won't go into. But it was that sort of unknown factor. And what we've learnt from the Royal Commission, and whilst we're getting a lot more focus on child abuse in the media, it is almost a good thing because it's actually educating us about the situation that's quite different to that. So what we know now is that children, for safety and comfort, seek familiarity and predictability. Yet offenders of child abuse are mainly people that they know because they've got that relationship of trust, and that relationship of trust can be taken advantage of when people might be on their own, for example. So what I'm talking about in terms of mitigating risks for ourselves and our kids is trying to avoid those situations where we find ourselves or other people find themselves in situations where that advantage can be, that situation can be taken advantage of. We've got some stats there too. That perpetrators can be children as well. So that's a very old stat where children under 17 committed up to 16% of child sexual abuse. So we need to update those figures first of all, but that's a frightening number. Got a question there? Exactly, and that's the frightening thing. We've had a culture of probably not wanting to delve into this area. Am I right in that? So we're now starting to get a lot better, and we're now starting to deal with those lower level concerns before they escalate into this. And this is what this whole thing's about. So it is more effective to address the risk factors. And I mentioned, I'm just ahead of myself with this, really. So what we're finding is in addressing the lower level situations, they don't snowball into something that is horrific. So in encouraging people to speak up, in getting that mutual understanding of what is acceptable and what is going to put you and others at risk, that's going to help us not have as many escalating situations. Does that make sense? I mean, for all of us. So we've particular focus on children and young people in this session. They're the most vulnerable in our society. So we have a specific responsibility as coaches or persons in positions of authority in swimming to make sure that we act on any concerns. Yep, you bet. Absolutely. And not just us, anyone in our sport. So whilst parents aren't considered, they don't have any official position in swimming, what we're encouraging with this new framework is that it's everyone's responsibility. So we want people to be letting us know if there is something happening, but I don't want you to freak out about that because there's some very simple steps that you take. It is not about burdening yourself with actioning things when there are serious concerns. Okay. So let's talk about the Safe Sport Framework. What it does, you're familiar with the codes of conduct previously, there were 10, because it's obvious that depending on what role you're in, there would be different standards of behaviour, right? I'm joking. Why should we expect different standards of behaviour depending on what role you're in? Is there any reason? I'm going to take that as a no. So no, we've taken the 10 codes of conduct and we've melded into one general code for us all, as well as a code of conduct for dealing with children and young people specifically. We've got a child protection commitment statement, which is something that we didn't have previously in our old policies. We've also got some complaint procedures, and what these do, they address those important environmental factors. We clarify the procedures for dealing with any concerns, and importantly too, we provide a lot of guidance and advice and templates and tools to make it as easy as possible for you and administrators running swimming in Australia. So that's all good, and most importantly, it reflects what we know from the Australian Childhood Foundation is best practice. Some key points to note, we touched on this. It refers to persons in positions of authority, and what that is on the slide there. Everyone in our sport who holds a position of authority, whether they are paid or unpaid, so that encompasses volunteers, and includes staff, coaches, officials, etc. So parents, no, they wouldn't be technically classified as persons in positions of authority, yet we would still want to make sure, as I mentioned, that they are raising concerns with us. What about kids? Under 18, I should clarify too, when we were talking about children and young people. What about, are there children in your clubs or facilities that coach or have other roles within clubs? Yep. So would they be persons in positions of authority? Yeah, absolutely. And what being a person in a position of authority means under this framework is that we have some additional duties and things that we need to be actioning. So we'll talk about those. The big difference too with this framework is that previously the member and child welfare policies only protected people who were actually members of Swimming Australia. So we've got 85,000 members now, and members of ASTA, I should say, as well. But under the old policies, if you weren't a member but you had a concern, there wasn't necessarily an obligation for us to act. What we're saying in this is that we want to make sure that all participants in swimming, whether or not you are a member or not, should be active in our swimming community, should help us with any concerns as well, and should be themselves abiding by the codes of conduct that we've got in this framework. So it's a bit more protection for you as well if you're noticing potentially antisocial behaviour of parents. Okay. What it means if you're a person in a position of authority is these are the obligations that you have. We need to understand what the rights of children and young people are. We need to appropriately act on concerns. We should understand what the definitions, indicators and impact of child abuse is. That's next. Know and follow the relevant laws relating to child abuse, and they are slightly different depending on what state or territory you are operating in. Following the codes of conduct, and obviously not harming or exploiting children and young people. Is there anything that's that new in there for you? No. Getting a few shakes of the head. It's actually not that new. What we're doing is being much more explicit though in stating that that is absolutely what we should be doing. Let's go on to the code of conduct for dealing with children and young people. Some key aspects without going through it all. I've got a summary resource for you that you can have a look at after this session. It covers things like positive guidance. So how you're using language and tone of voice as you coach kids obviously needs to be constructive. We don't want to be belittling, we don't want to make children upset. And, you know, sometimes I think we talked before about, you know, some people will be in tears if they're pushed in terms of performance. We need to be mindful of that, but there's a big difference between mistreating someone and what you're doing from a performance aspect. If that became a pattern, yes, I'd be concerned. But we know that there's an element of a high performance squad needing to push, so we can differentiate there as long as we've got some controls and measures in place. Adhering to role boundaries, what do you think this means? You're the coach, not their friend. Yeah, spot on. So if you're a coach, you're not necessarily a masseur. You're not their parent, you're not their friend. And if we talk about what that means in terms of mitigating risks for them and for you, it does mean that you kind of have to stick to your role. Teachers are under the most intense restrictions. Who's a school teacher here? Yeah, okay, a few of you. Am I right in saying that, you know, you just can't do, you can't do anything outside your teaching role at all in schools? And that would be, someone said to me in a previous session, you know, driving a kid to the end of the driveway within the school grounds. You couldn't do that, right? Yeah. So we're following that sort of line. That is what is now considered standard as making sure that we are sticking to what we are employed to do. Now, what it doesn't mean is that if we have a child whose parents are running late from picking them up, that we leave them on the side of the road. That would not be good. So what can we do in a situation like that? Wait. Yeah, exactly. Get a witness. Tell someone. What happens if you have to drive them home? Because there are provisions in here that do state, and I think one of the most important ones is one that was mentioned very early on. Don't put yourself in a situation where you are alone with a child and young person that is not within view of others. You know, we just don't want you being at risk, and we don't want others being at risk too. So always make sure you've got that visibility wherever possible. There will be situations where that's not possible though, and we need to be pragmatic about that. So one of the things that we did in drafting this framework was consider all the realistic situations that we are in swimming. So with the CEOs, some things that we strived for initially said it's just not practical. So what then, if you are finding yourself in a situation where maybe you have to drop someone home on a very rare occasion, you can tell someone at your club, you can make sure you're letting the parents know what time you're leaving and what time you anticipate getting back. There might be another person you can take along with you. So it's asking those questions as to how we can do things differently rather just saying that we can't do stuff anymore. So it's thinking a bit more laterally. Absolutely. I'd recommend being in text or phone contact with them, absolutely, and preferably in writing. Having said that, good segue, electronic communications. I mean, this has just changed the world. This is just an absolute minefield of things that can go wrong. It's quite frightening at times what can happen in the cyber world. So we've also got provisions in the Code of Conduct for Children and Young People about not being in direct electronic contact with children that you're coaching. So again, we ask the question, well, what are the alternatives? Any thoughts? Sorry? Group messaging, definitely. And there are various apps that, obviously WhatsApp, but Team App is something that's come up as being particularly useful in sport. Has anyone used that? Yep. Does it work for you, Ash?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, perfect. So, and communication should be swimming related, obviously. You would never contact a child or young person about anything that was personal without copying their parents or guardian. Does that seem over the top? No. Okay, good. Yeah, question? It is proof. What we're suggesting though is that a parent should understand what communication they're having in the cyber world because it can be a lot more hidden than that, particularly chat rooms and messaging through Facebook and other means. So our advice to you would be, if in doubt, don't do it. Group message, yeah. Just copy the parent in. Yeah. The questions? No? So we've also got provisions about sexual misconduct. That hasn't changed to any extent. So again, clearly don't go there. Physical conduct should be role specific and appropriate with an introduction to what you're doing and why you're doing it. So if you need to, be in contact with someone about a stroke, a technique, that sort of thing. Change room arrangements. A number of clubs, and I'd be interested with a show of hands, who has a no mobile phones in change rooms policy where you work? Okay, we're getting there. More than last year, which is pleasing to see. It's a really easy thing that we can do. Unfortunately, part of my role is working with Mark Anderson, the CEO of Swimming Australia, on any issues that come through about children and young people. And we've had a couple of situations where photos might have been taken in change rooms. So again, what can we do to mitigate that happening? Let's not let people take the phones in there with the intent of using them. We know what kids can be like. So let's not have the situation where they might be able to take advantage of that. Transporting children we've spoken about. So if you're not meant to be alone with a child or young person without someone else being able to see you, transporting children is obviously not on either. And then overnight stays and sleeping arrangements. We've had some good guidance in terms of safe trips away. So with camps and things like that, Swimming Australia for Junior Pan Packs last year we discussed it with the team that were going, and they decided that they're actually going to have a dry management team, because if should anything happen to the kids, they would need to be able to put in place very quick arrangements. At the very least, there are sort of minimum standards that we'd want one adult to every 10 children, for example. You'd want to make sure that there are designated people that were staying dry at any one time. Right, so there are some things there. Any questions on all that? Nope. Okay, cool. All right, what I'd like to do now is just go into a bit on child abuse, and I promise you it would lighten up a little bit. So bear with me. Now, under our framework, we've actually taken some very broad definitions of child abuse and harm. So what we're talking about under the Safe Sport framework is that child abuse is the mistreatment of a child or young person that has harmed, is harming, or is likely to harm or endanger that child's physical, emotional health, development or well-being. Tough one with is likely to harm. It's a very, very subjective test, and we'll talk further about how we can rationalise that if we're not sure. There are a number of different types of child abuse, and they're listed on this slide. So I just want to ask you, what are the sorts of signs that you would expect to see if any of these types of child abuse were going on with any of your squad members? Withdrawn, yeah, definitely. Number one thing I would say, if you've got a particularly extroverted or exuberant child and they withdraw into themselves, a change of behaviour is a very telling sign. Similarly, if they are a very introverted child and they start acting out. So that's absolutely one of the major indicators. Any others? Bruising? Yep. Yep, for sure. How many of you are parents? Yep. How'd you feel if your child was spending more time in their rooms and on the computer and that sort of thing too? Would that be a sign, potentially? It's normal, yeah. more than normal. Unfortunately, we have had cases where kids have potentially not been able to show their parents their phone or their computer, and so if you're finding that there's a protective element there, that's a bit of a warning sign too, or there is that change of behaviour again. So they're the sorts of signs to look out for. Now let's talk about harm. So because the definition of child abuse does talk about likely to harm. So what is harm? It is any detrimental effect of a significant nature to the child's physical, psychological or emotional well-being. Doesn't matter how the harm is caused, and it can be caused by any one of those things. So whether it's, in particular, a single act or a series of acts or omissions. So it can be one very big thing, or it can be a number of smaller things that together cause a pattern that will cause detriment to that child. So it's very broad. Question? Oh, yeah. Yeah, to me that would be an indicator of something very, very wrong. And if we're not facing into that and having conversations to make sure that it's, that sort of concern is, addressed with Parents Swimming Australia, depending on the circumstances, we'd need to do that. Yep, good call out. Okay, does that all make sense? Let's talk a bit about grooming. It's a relatively new concept. So what do you know about grooming? Yes, definitely. With the intent of what? Exploiting them. Yeah, usually sexually. And Yeah, it is. You talked about sort of building that trust. So it could be through a number of avenues, such as befriending a parent, spending more time with the child. So, you know, we've said here, with the intention of sexually abusing them, building that trusting relationship and isolating the child then to abuse him or her. So, you know, the sorts of behaviours such as, you know, whether it's giving gifts, whether it's taking them on treats to various activities that we would now say under this code of conduct, stick within your role as a coach. Don't be the friend that is likely to send alarm bells to other people, because as we know from the school world, those sorts of behaviours are really frowned upon these days. So we need to be a bit more cautious. Questions with that? All right. So what are we doing to actually safeguard? We know a bit more about child abuse now. I'll leave it there. The framework actually has a number of things that we can do. So first of all, how are we recruiting our people within swimming? How are we screening them? We've got specific provisions in there where we need to make sure that we're advertising roles with a clear statement of our commitment, referencing the Safe Sport framework, that we have face-to-face interviews or video interviews, at least one. We conduct reference checks. I have a template that we can use in terms of the standard questions that you would ask referees. Make sure we're verifying someone's previous employment history. And that includes questions about how much they've worked with children and young people before and whether there were any concerns. So we don't have to overcook it. It's just making sure we're checking in on that stuff. Proof of identity, proof of qualifications. Again, unfortunately, we've had situations where people have falsified what they've done in the past. So we need to be more vigilant with that. Records, keeping records, making sure we've got the working with children checks or the blue card, and keeping registers of those. So we will do that more now, and it's not too difficult either. We've got a complaints commitment too, so we want to make sure that all complaints that arise in swimming are dealt with in a fair, timely and transparent manner. We want to escalate them as appropriate, and we've got a new escalation system that makes sure that the right sorts of matters are going to specific people and organisations. We have to consider the wishes of the complainants. So this is an interesting one too, particularly if you've got children and young people, because often children and young people might not want a matter to go any further, but it is absolutely incumbent upon us, if someone is at risk of harm, to make sure that we do whatever we can to mitigate that risk. So we definitely consider the wishes of the complainant, and I've had a few scenarios where we've been able to do that, but also make sure that the matter was escalated. So from that perspective, we can't promise secrecy in those situations. We have to maintain appropriate confidentiality, but again, there will be situations where we need to disclose, and there are also provisions coming in across Australia where any sorts of potential child abuse need to be reported to a state ombudsman or equivalent. So the requirements upon us are just getting greater and greater. So the more we can do this within our sport initially, it will help in the future. Reporting to relevant authorities, so mandatory reporting in certain situations, and upholding the principles of natural justice. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it means that the person complained of and the complainant understands what the allegations are. They have an opportunity to respond. There's no sort of bias within the process, that sort of thing. Yep. Excuse me for 1 second. Now, I mentioned we have an escalation process now. What we've done through the process and through talking to people like Kevin Haseman and Mark Heathcote is it can be scary stuff, and not everyone is going to be equipped with the very serious allegations where children and young people are at risk of harm. So what can we do to make sure that we've got some specialised expertise in that area? And that's one of the reasons why all allegations of child abuse, sexual misconduct, serious criminal conduct, they will go to Swimming Australia, and it will be someone like myself and Mark Anderson, who will deal with those matters. Now, it may be, depending on the situation, that it's appropriate for a club or a state to deal with those matters, but we certainly want to be kept across them and make sure that they're managed as best they possibly can. So there we call those case one. Down the bottom we have the general member or adult member complaints, and we encourage clubs, facilities, ASTA to deal with those matters as much as they can. And then if there needs to be an appeal, they can go to the state bodies. There might also be situations where, you know, a couple of kids from a couple of different clubs have a bust up at state champs, and it's appropriate for the state body to be involved there. So fairly simple escalation process that just means that we know that we've got the right people dealing with the right complaints. Any questions on that? Nope. So what do you do if you receive a complaint? What would you do now? What do you reckon? Yeah, there's grievance officers and MPIOs. Definitely, definitely. If there's not a grievance officer, but the right thing to do is to tell someone, who would you tell? President, yeah. So, and what we talk about in here is to tell a senior person. So whether it's a president or, you know, if the president was the person that was informed about the allegations, they might then call a colleague in the state body or a district, for example. So just making sure that you're taking the steps to talk to someone who's a more senior person than you to take the appropriate action. If you're receiving someone's concerns, what we would say is that you would talk to that complainant very calmly and without judgment. So, you know, we need to get into the habit of not sort of doing the facial expressions like, huh, what are you talking about? We need to be open to understanding what it is the concern is. The conversation needs to occur in a private and safe environment. And if it's a child or young person, just making sure that, again, that's within visibility of others, even if you need to take yourself away from a group. Ask non-leading questions, and the best way, I think, to summarise this and remember that is just the who, what, when, where, how, why, with one addition, and that is the what next. What is it that they would like to occur next in terms of what they would like to get out of raising this concern with you? If it's appropriate, you might be able to take steps to resolve it. So that's great. And that will be up to you, the situation and the confidence you have in that. But if it is not easily resolved, as we mentioned, an MPIO, grievance officer, a more senior person who's a person in a position of authority. For kids in raising allegations of child abuse, for the very serious allegations, it is so rare for children to lie. It takes a lot of courage for them to raise these concerns, and we must believe them and we must take them seriously. We have to be calm, supportive and reassuring, particularly that the abuse is not their fault. Often they feel as though they've brought this on themselves, and that's why they hold it to themselves for too long a lot of the time. So if we can just concentrate on their feelings and explain what we're going to do next, and often that is not promising secrecy, as I mentioned. We can't make promises that we can't keep. And it's also important not to push them to give too much detail. So that really calm, reassuring approach will help to draw them out to say, it's okay, you're doing the right thing by telling me this. So let's talk about what we can do to make you feel better. It's a tough thing to do. And if in doubt, you call someone like myself or others within the swimming industry. Righto, we're nearly there. Reporting. So anything that is involves an immediate threat of harm must be reported. So there's mandatory reporting requirements. Are you aware of those for your states? They are slightly different. So in some states, for example, you'd be required to report any allegations of physical abuse as well as sexual abuse. Some states have lower requirements, but again, the general rule would be, if in doubt, you would report to the authorities. Of course, if there is immediate threat of harm, you would ring the police. So again, it'll be judging those situations and making sure that you're making appropriate decisions with a senior person. You must disclose actual harm, the potential risk of harm, signs or indicators of harm, so that they would be signs that could indicate that harm is likely to occur, and breaches of policy. And if they involve children and young people, they need to come up to Swimming Australia under this framework. And all you need is a reasonable belief that harm is occurring or is at risk of occurring. And that's just an inclination to believe rather than not believe. I often say to people, if your gut's telling you that something's not right, it probably isn't. And people say, but it's not really that much of it in itself, so I don't know that it's worth reporting. But what you don't know is what other incidents or instances have been reported in addition. And sometimes the pieces of the puzzle come together. So it is really important that if we are getting concerns, that we do report them. There may not need to be any action. It may just be a simple matter of keeping a watching brief on something. But we have to have all the information to be able to make a judgment call. Question?
So is that reasonable to believe that kind of taking into account that state of life that you saw likely to occur?
Absolutely. So you don't have to prove that something's happened, is what we're saying. It's if you're worried that there are signs or indicators that indicate that something is not right with a child's behaviour, that you've witnessed behaviour that's not appropriate, that could put someone at risk, then we need to know about it. Absolutely. We'd follow everything up. I mean, we've made a commitment. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions on that? Hey guys, we've done well. We've reached the very practical part of the session now, unless there's any other sort of questions on that major content. No? Okay, cool. What I'm going to do now is let's talk about applying the Code of Conduct for children and young people. So I'm going to reveal a piece of information, one line at a time, and there's a scale on the next slide. So positive, acceptable, neutral, inappropriate or abusive. And I'd like you to tell me where on that scale you think the situation is. Okay, give it a go. John is Chris's swimming coach. Unacceptable. I know it's been a long day, but still. Neutral? Come on, I'd say that's really positive. I think you're being a bit tough on yourselves, guys. It's good to be a swimming coach, right? That's why you're here. Come on. All right. John arranges to watch Chris play football on a Saturday. Chris's mum is okay with this as John has gotten to know her well and Chris has grown very fond of John. A few groans from the crowd. Talk to me. Inappropriate? Why would you say it's inappropriate? Okay, so we've got two possible explanations here. One is that it's outside his role, and the other is that he might be befriending Chris's mum. Yeah? Any contrary views to that? Spot on. So we don't know whether he's actually at the football because he's got a child there of his own. So we'd need to find out some more information, definitely. There could be other explanations as to why that's occurring. But the interesting thing is it's raising some antenna based on the Code of Conduct. The question then becomes, all right, well, what are we doing to find out some answers to those questions if we have any concerns? All right, let's keep going. Sometimes when Chris's mother can't get away from work, John gives Chris a lift home from training. Thoughts? Slowly getting worse? Yeah. So the code of conduct does talk about not transporting children, being alone in situations with children. So what are the questions that you'd ask in this situation? Yeah. Another parent, does Chris's mum know? Does someone from the club or facility know? Other options, absolutely. Yeah. If he does have a son, is he taking that person home or a daughter? Are there other people in the car? Okay. If they're not, then where would it be on the scale? Inappropriate, definitely. Definitely. Chris shows Johnny's room. And they hang out there for a while, listening to music, chatting and lying around. Inappropriate, resoundingly. Yes. Why under the Code of Conduct for Children and Young People? I think we've got a detective up the back here. No, it's wonderful because you're asking the right question. So do we know how old John is? Do we know how old John is? Do we know how old Chris is? No. So we're probably assuming that we've got children here, first of all. The other question I'd like to ask you is Chris a male or a female? Don't know. Would it matter? No. No, absolutely not. So, and geez, I have a few stories to tell you might have noticed, but whether it's male, female, male, it just doesn't matter these days. No, because what we're looking at here is what's appropriate in terms of the standards of behaviour under the Code of Conduct for Children and Young People. He must be over 18, unless he's driving illegally, in which case that's case 1, serious criminal conduct. All right, let's do the next one. John is a qualified masseur. Sometimes when Chris has had a particularly hard training session, he'll give Chris a massage. Now this is an interesting one because he's a qualified masseur, right? So what are the questions we'd ask here? Is he getting paid for it? So, okay, is he engaged as a masseur for Chris? If he is, that's probably appropriate if it's being done in situations in which the parent has consented to. But if he's not, inappropriate. With the potential to be abusive, depending on how long that's going on too. So, yeah. After a few months, Chris tells his mum that he doesn't want to swim anymore and doesn't want to see John. So this is really where you can see how it just builds up and builds up, and we've got a child who's withdrawing from swimming, who clearly doesn't want to be around the coach that he's previously been under. So not a good situation, and likely abusive in that situation. Can I attempt one more, please? Yeah? All right. The boys in the club swimming team take photos of each other all the time. Does this happen? What if I said girls? Does that happen? Happens all the time, right? Yeah, it's interesting the different perception of girls and boys in this example. I previously had girls. Sometimes they take photos in the change rooms. So, yeah, we've got an inappropriate situation here because what we're saying under the Code of Conduct for Children and Young People is that it is not appropriate to take electronic gadgets and use those to take photos, particularly in situations like this. So we would actively discourage that. One of the boys sends a photo of another boy to his coach's phone. What in here. So I take it that's a what's the photo of? Do we know what the photo's of? No. It's come straight after the change room, so it's not looking good. No. No. Let's assume it's an inappropriate photo. The coach has done nothing wrong here. Sorry? Sorry, I didn't catch it. It does depend on the coach reaction. So it's a really good point. What would the coach do in that situation? What should you do if you've received an inappropriate photo on your phone that you haven't asked for? Okay, I'll just summarise for a minute here. We had delete it, we had notify the parents. Any other ones? Yeah, so it's a bit tricky. Best thing in these situations is actually to make sure that someone who is a more senior person has seen that you've got this and that you've immediately reported it to someone. And it may be a case of sending it to us if there really is some serious implications coming out of that. But then it must be deleted. It's a tricky one. Well, if it's pornography, then you'd be criminal conduct, and it'd be incumbent upon you to take to the police.
If you send it on, say you was paid to take a screenshot of the caption underneath it, send it to your employer or whatever it might be, you might be laid out or something like that.
Yeah, you're being a bit of trouble. So, best to show someone. If it would be absolutely bordering on pornography, you'd want to go to the police. Because what else has happened? I mean, gosh, it's frightening. So we've had situations where, for example, there's been messaging going on that had the potential to become sexual, so grooming type situation of messaging. And in those situations, we have received screenshots of messages. So again, best thing you can do is make sure someone knows what you've got and what you've done in terms of that. Send it to the appropriate people if it's involving children and young people. Myself, Mark Anderson, your state territory CEO, and we will make sure that the matter is handled appropriately. It's a really troubling area. It's a real minefield. Yeah, but again, if you take that immediate action and make sure you document that too. I'm just saying, make sure you show the person who's more senior in your club. If it involves a child, call me. Get in contact with me, and we'll deal with it together. Oh, please tell me. Yeah. Goodness. So just for the people, did you hear that? There was a situation where someone was charged for reporting an inappropriate photo to the police. I wonder whether there was something more to it, but... Yeah. Okay. Great advice. So that was just then. So if you report the person and their number and show someone else but delete the photo, then you won't be in that situation. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, really. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Really good advice there. It's frightening, isn't it? It's really scary stuff. No, and that's the thing. This is a situation when you haven't done anything wrong. So how do you protect yourself in these situations? And when we're getting to that stage, we're really in the sort of pornography area rather than... So what we know too is that it's just not on to be in electronic contact with a child without having someone else copied into that communication, right? So it just shouldn't be happening, regardless of whether the photo is pornographic, inappropriate, borderline inappropriate. We must take steps to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Yeah? They might not know, and a lot of this, yeah, spot on, they might think it's a joke. And that's where, as persons in a position of authority, if we understand the current landscape, the social landscape, the child abuse landscape, the criminal potential and the consequences, it's incumbent on us to make sure that if people don't understand, that they're educated about that. So whether it's a colleague, whether it's a child in your squad, we absolutely need to make sure that we're addressing that. And we have to be a bit realistic about it too. A lot of the time, this is new. Came in July last year. So we are still in the education process. So the first thing to ask is, have you heard of the Safe Sport Framework? Because I don't know if you realise that there are some new behavioural standards in there that mean that this sort of conduct actually isn't on anymore. Okay, let's keep going. The coach is in her early 20s and they often text each other about training and swim meet arrangements. We've kind of talked about this, right? It will depend whether or not the texting was in a group context. But if they're, just texting one-to-one, again, where would that be? Inappropriate. Yeah. At the next training session, the coach thanks the boy for sending the photo and asks the boys as they go into the change room, are you taking your phones in with you? Creepy. Creepy. So when we're talking about grooming sort of behaviour, those sexual connotation jokes and things, they're just not on either. We do need to be a bit more careful about what we're saying and how we're saying it. Final one. The photo is then posted on Facebook by one of the parents of the boy who took the photo. And the parent implies on Facebook that it's the coach that has actually brought this on. Now, this has actually happened. This has happened. What would you do in that situation? First of all, is it right of the parent to be posting that photo on Facebook? No. So if the parent, who's a participant under our Safe Sport Framework, has an issue, they should be raising it through the appropriate channels and not on social media. So we've addressed that previously by ensuring that, again, does the parent know about the obligations under the Safe Sport Framework and what can we do to educate them? So usually it might be the president of the club, having a conversation and then documenting and writing to that parent to make sure that they're aware of their obligations. Should they breach those again, there might be consequences. So you can see again, these things can tend to really spiral out of control. And if we're addressing some of the concerns at the top of these examples so that they don't escalate and get to the point at the end of them, that's the best thing that we can do for our kids and for ourselves. Any other questions at this point? Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there because I know it's been a long day for you. I've got many, many examples, and if you've got any concerns, I'd encourage you to come and speak to me after this session as well. Question?
You mentioned a few times to be able to get in contact with you. What's the best way to be able to do that?
So on the Swimming Australia website, there's a Safe Sport link, which is actually on the slide here. On every drop-down menu, so there's a coach tab, there's a swimmer tab, there's a parent tab, there's a club tab, and under each of those tabs there's a Safe Sport link. My email address is on that, so you can contact me via email, no problem. Sorry. So yes, that was just to let you know that that's there, and also too, it's a long document. It's got a lot more guidance in, and that's why it's longer. But what I have done is made sure that there's a checklist on all the obligations for the Code of Conduct for dealing with children and young people. There's a checklist for things like recruitment and screening. There's even a sort of a summary of all of our obligations for persons in positions of authority under the framework. So they're really helpful reminders and you know, templates for you to use for yourself and within your clubs too. So with that, I just really want to emphasise too, this is not about putting the weight of the world on your shoulders. Yes, we have an important role. You have an important role because you've got the potential to have a profound impact on children in our sport. But what this is all about is making sure that safeguarding each other is a shared responsibility. We're all responsible. And we encourage people to address those environmental risks. We've got clearer responsibilities now, clearer processes for dealing with those, and an obligation to help our colleagues to understand what those are if they're not already aware. So I'd just like to say thank you for everything you do already and that I know you'll continue to do. And please contact me or stay around if you've got any questions. Thank you and congratulations, end of day 1.